she is just someone who walks in perseverance and just the identity that Jesus has given her, and really just like from a young age has just said yes to trusting Jesus. So you get to hear a lot about her story today, about her. Just a second, just a second, sweetie. Yeah, you can see too. So yeah, just buckle up. I just want to encourage you, like, as you're listening to, just like ask Jesus, like, how can I learn from Rachel? How can I learn from her story? Because I think I will be processing her story and just like taking wisdom from it for like the rest of this year. So, you see Carson? It's exciting. So yeah, Rachel, I'm passing the mic to you. You got this, buddy. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Okay, so it took me a while to get this put together because I didn't realize until I started writing this out how long my story is, and I can't talk as long as it actually is. You all know me. Like Megan might be the only one that doesn't really super know me.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've had to speak not off the cuff between yesterday and today, like in several years, because most of the track stuff I do is just like, oh, you're going to talk today. Go ahead and talk, say something. It's not too bad to say something about athletes and it's short, but if you're trying to say something to a whole group that spans most of your life, it needs to be organized. I'm normally using it just to help athletes out.
Yeah. Well, good for you, though. I would not be able to stand up and give a presentation of any kind.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad yesterday, but I think today it's so much more informal because I get to just sit here and drink my BioSteel and talk to you ladies on my computer.
Yeah.
I
Like,
decided my topic is but God. This has been the tip of my last year. I wrote it on my throwing shoes as I was pushing for the 2024 Olympics. And looking back, this really defines most of my life. As I led our sisterhood online a couple weeks ago, I was trying to figure out what to talk about. But God, ... came up specifically to other ladies in the group. And I knew God was saying, that's what you have to talk about. My Olympic dream began at the age of 3 as I was watching the Olympics on an old VHS tape. Most of you will probably remember that. Naomi may not know what VHS is. There were multiple sports showcased. I decided then that I wanted to get to the Olympics someday. I started with basketball, throwing a basketball hundreds of times until I could score on a 10-foot hoop. I thought my Olympic dreams would come with basketball, but God had other plans. When I was 9, I was introduced to the world of track and field, and I fell in love with javelin. But God had other plans. I was too young to throw javelin yet in a competition, so instead I tried discus and shot put. My first year out, I started breaking records and thought maybe this would go somewhere. So I discovered through this that I had a passion for track and field. And when I was done throwing, I'd volunteer at the competitions for the rest of the day, pulling around hammers, retrieving discuses, and I'd get a free t-shirt and food out of the deal. So for, 9, 10 years old, like free food and a t-shirt was awesome. But as a kid coming from nowhere, homeschooled from a family that had no name in the track world, things weren't easy. There were constant accusations of cheating and drugs as I competed into high school. I had kids try to get me thrown out of meets because they're like, oh, you must be on steroids or you're cheating because you're homeschooled and you don't actually do school. You just practice all day long. I'm like, it's not how this works. In high school, a whole new realm of difficulty started. At 14, I was on track to be at the 2004 Olympics in Athens, Greece, in the discus. Javelins was looking promising too. I thought I'd be the first discus and javelin dual thrower in the Olympics. That kind of combination is kind of unheard of. But then I had a literal chair pulled out from underneath me, and I slammed my lower back into a windowsill. I could barely walk for 3 days as I was in so much pain. After that, I was diagnosed with sciatica. I couldn't practice at all for 3 months. I went to chiropractic regularly, but it didn't do much. Acupuncture was suggested, but where I grew up, just letting somebody else in here. Where I grew up, it was considered witchcraft, and physical therapy wasn't something that was done for kids. So if chiropractic didn't fix it, I just had to live with it. I thought I was done with throwing and that basketball would go back to being my Olympic route, as that didn't bother my sciatica near as much, but God had other plans. I learned how to cope with the pain and push through the flare-ups. My distances dropped drastically, but I began to slowly build back. By the end of the season, I qualified for and was invited to compete at the most prestigious national competition in the USA. This was the Junior Olympics, basically, just for the USA. I was the youngest one there and ended up 12th out of 24. I was having technical difficulties due to the sciatica issues, but I was happy for the opportunity. I was nearly forced to quit throwing, though, at that point because I hadn't done well enough. I actually got told I'd never go anywhere with throwing and should stick to basketball. But God had other plans, and my relationship with Him also grew. My verse through high school, most of you may have heard, was Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I joined a homeschool track team and began competing all over the state, as well as helping to coach some teammates. It was really on this team that I discovered that I love coaching. This is related to what comes later, but I was not allowed to compete at the biggest competition as a homeschooler, the state meet. Goes back to them thinking I'm cheating because I'm practicing too much, or, not even doing school at all. But God said I didn't need that meet to get noticed. There was another competition that I could go to that combined the best from the surrounding states. I came out of that competition as a double gold medalist in discus and javelin, athlete of the meet, and then I landed an interview in the paper that put my name on the front page right underneath Marion Jones, who was a big Olympic sprinter at the time. That was a pivotal moment for me. Scholarship offers started to come in, and I knew I'd be able to continue on my Olympic journey. I ended up accepting a full ride to a small NCAA Division I university called Oral Roberts for track and field. Most of you have probably been to some of the church services where we've had speakers from ORU, such a small world. I come up here and ORU's still coming with me. There were several other offers, but I knew after much prayer that God was leading me to ORU, even though I had several people in my life at the time who did not want me going there. So my first year at ORU, everything went pretty smoothly. I became the newcomer of the year, broke several records. My sciatica was more under control. My stress levels went down significantly in college in spite of my maxed out course load. And I finally was able to get baptized after not being allowed to in my youth. I don't have time to get into that part of my story, though. That would make this hours long talk. I continued to make improvements up through my second year and found a best friend that could only be described as God sent. My distances were skyrocketing, and javelin was swiftly becoming my best event. I was coaching newcomers on the team and spreading the love of throwing to everyone I could, including my best friend. She even ended up joining the team. My coach liked to call these kids that I brought on sandwich eaters because they'd never thrown before. And so he's like, you can coach these kids. And like, I'll coach the ones that came here on scholarship. But then at a practice in the fall of 2007, the direction of my athletic life changed. I took a throw in javelin practice and my sciatic seized and I fell to the ground. Walking was incredibly painful. I got sent to physiotherapy for weeks and had to lay off of throwing. I started biking around campus just to keep up on my physical fitness. There wasn't a whole lot I could do otherwise. One night I was biking and went over a curb into a huge hole and knocked myself out. I later found out it was the only hole in an entire mile strip. And this was like just this random deep hole for no reason on the other side of a curb. I don't remember my half-mile ride back to campus, but I do remember getting into the elevator at my dorm and having people look at me strange. I had blood down my face, dirt on me, and 2 black eyes. And I found out later that if I'd been wearing a helmet, it probably would have killed me, snapped my neck. So when I made it back to the dorm room, I didn't remember my best friend and roommate. I wasn't fully there, but I knew I had a concussion and ran through the check protocols. Tells you how many concussions I'd had that I knew what the check protocols were. I still remembered phone numbers and my college ID number, which is like remembering your social. But the whole last year of my memory was gone. My biggest concern was whether I had a test to study for the next day for art history. The ER confirmed my diagnosis. Thankfully, the amnesia was only short term, and I got most of my memory back in 48 hours. But God brought something good out of this. Something in my back and hip released in the crash, and at my next physiotherapy appointment, I felt something literally pop and unravel. I still had issues with the sciatic, but I could walk normally and throw again. I also became close with one of the girls who found me in the elevator, and we became best friends. God knew I'd need her because later that year on March 8th, my best friend and another friend were killed in a car accident on the way to a church event. I would have been in the vehicle with them, but my coach had decided to take me to a last chance qualifier competition for indoor nationals in another state. Somehow that season, I still went to outdoor nationals and placed sixth in the country, but I don't remember much through the grieving. I look at pictures I took and don't remember anything about where I was or why. I know I had several mental breakdowns, and mental health at that time wasn't talked about other than in a negative light. If you are having mental issues, you must have a demon. But God sent wise friends and pastors, and the families of the two women who were killed became adopted parents to me. The girl I'd met in the elevator became my roommate the fall semester that followed and kept me going through an incredibly hard year that followed. I ended up disowned by my biological parents, which is also another story we don't have time for. And a close childhood friend committed suicide 6 months after the accident, almost to the day. I was mad at God, mad that everything in my life had completely gone to garbage. He reminded me that he was always there and could handle me being angry at him. It was a rough road, but I became closer with God through it. Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and strength, mighty and impenetrable, a very present and well-proved help in trouble. I took the next year of college, which was my fourth year at that point, as a red shirt from my track team to process my grief better. I extended my college to a fifth year. Normally college is just 4 years, and added a minor to my major in order to stay competition eligible. The way NCAA rules work is if you don't do a certain amount of credit hours, you can't compete. So I had to add a minor in order to be able to keep competing. I still went to competitions, but it wasn't as important that I did well. And in that year, I made another good friend out of one of my professors. I frequently went and talked to her about life problems, and she became another adopted mom to me. She still remains an adopted mom. I go down to the States and visit her every year, stay in her house for a couple of weeks. She puts me up in like this suite that she's got upstairs. It's really, really nice. And it's really great to be able to visit with her. Took me years to stop calling her by her like professor name though. She kept drilling into me. You don't need to call me that anymore. I'm not your professor. And I began to improve again with fewer mental breakdowns. By the next year, when I rejoined my teammates traveling, I was able to focus on doing my job again and improved over and over again in all 5 of my events. And there was a little bit of a hiccup in indoor season. I had a really good indoor season, but I dislocated my left shoulder throwing weight. Thankfully, it didn't affect my discus too much, but I had to lay off of shot put. I couldn't throw javelin the same way after the sciatic flare either, so discus became my number 1 event. I finished my collegiate career at outdoor nationals 3rd in the country, and then won the President's Cup from our college, which is only given to the top athletes after they've completed their entire time at university. So it was a huge honor getting that too. A new struggle began after graduation, and that was how to keep up my training outside of the collegiate world. You lose a lot of your supports the moment you graduate college. I couldn't get any sponsors. The job market was rough. This was 2010. Finding a job, even with a degree, was difficult. They wanted 15 years of experience for minimum wage with a degree. I thought I'd be going into graphic design, but God had other plans and made a way for me to become a painter. You can see some of the stuff I've done because I still love doing that. I love the work. It kept me in shape, and the hours worked well with my training. My college coach continued working with me, even though he left ORU when I graduated. I took his place at ORU as a volunteer coach, not really knowing where coaching was going, just knowing I love seeing other athletes improved. I coached one of my teammates to breaking my javelin school record, and it was one of my proudest moments. I still remember her coming up to me and telling me after conference, because I couldn't go with her to that meet. She's like, I broke your school record in the javelin throw. I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, this is so good. I want you to be better than I am. It was awesome. My adopted family and friends became my support system. I didn't think I would have anyone in my corner, but God provided far more than I could have ever imagined. God was providing even when I didn't know he was. I actually met my husband in 2009 in the throes of what I called my year of hell when everything fell apart, but he didn't really come into the picture until 2011, which is yet another very long story of God's faithfulness that we don't have time for. We got married in March of 2012. We eloped, another part of the story. And that year I had family, which is friends who become family, help me on my Olympic journey. And I made it to the US Olympic trials with my best season ever. I placed 17th out of 24 after a bad call by an official. I would have been top 8 with a good possibility of higher without that bad call. They wouldn't allow me to protest for some reason, and I didn't fully know what my rights were as an athlete as I went there without a coach. my coach wasn't able to come to the meet at the time. A few months after that, in October of 2012, we moved to Canada and I began my path to citizenship. At that meet, I would have been top 8 with a good possibility of going higher or even qualifying for the Olympics. But representing the US at the Olympics would have muddied my citizenship path and my athletic journey within Canada as well, because then there's all this transfer paperwork and other stuff, and you have to be approved, which takes even longer. But God knew where I needed to be. My road to citizenship proved to be a much bigger challenge than it should have been. Service Canada went on the longest strike in Canadian history not long after I arrived in Canada. And I got my application in just 3 days late, which delayed my process from being able to work by over a year and delayed my citizenship by over 2 years. So my path that I had thought I was going on changed completely. And I couldn't go much of anywhere after the first 6 months in Canada, and did a lot of baking, lots of baking and volunteer work. So I could do that without getting in trouble. The stress of moving to Canada, away from my coach, my gym, my routine, my program, to a much higher altitude, drastically colder weather, and everyone I had known, was a huge shock. I went from 2012 and having the best competitive year of my life to 2013 and barely throwing what I'd thrown coming out of high school in 2006. I got shingles a few months after moving to Canada at the age of 26. That was actually when Pastor Melissa asked me to coffee to get to know me, and I had to warn her that I was having a hard time moving or walking because of the pain. The nerve pain from my fight with shingles plagued me for over a year. I still feel the shingles line when I get stressed out, to tell you how bad the case was. I knew that was a contributing factor to the bad year that I had, but I seriously thought I had lost my forward path to the Olympics and wouldn't get it back. I told my coach, I think I've lost it. I don't know if I can go any further. But God had given me a great coach who still wanted to continue working with me. It took us a while to figure out how to continue training together via video, and for me to figure out how to feel the changes I needed to make when he wasn't there in person to tell me. It was a much slower process than I would have liked. Slowed down more by getting pregnant in 2015. I continued training throughout my pregnancy, but the sciatica that I dealt with for 15 years came back worse than ever once I hit my 3rd trimester. Desperate, I found an acupuncturist. Now, I remember acupuncture was considered witchcraft where I grew up, so I had to mentally fight past that hurdle in order to book this appointment. God had his hand on me there too, though, because the woman I booked with has been a blessing to me ever since. In 45 minutes, she took my sciatica away and it didn't come back. I had dealt with sciatic pain every day for 15 years and it was gone. A huge weight had been lifted. I was able to train until 2 days before my son was born, and resumed training 2 weeks after, thanks to the amazing people God had put in my path. Though as far as my throwing career went, I didn't start making forward progress again until 2018, 2 years after my son was born and 6 years after moving to Canada, without any improvement. But God, during that time frame, brought athletes to me that expanded my coaching experience. What I had to learn to work remotely with my coach, I've been able to use with my remote athletes that I work with in India and the UK and BC and the USA. So God had a plan even in that. And I've been able to use my own experiences, good and bad, to help the athletes I coach to be better than I was. This journey has been a lot longer than I had imagined it would be at the age of 3 or even at the age of 14. I'm not sure if I'd wanted to keep going if you had told me that my Olympic dream would keep getting crushed over and over and over again, and that I'd keep training. As I get older, new challenges come my way. I represented Canada in 2018 after winning the Canadian Championships just 2 weeks after I got my citizenship. So I'd just become eligible to represent Canada. At that international competition, I threw discus and was also asked to throw javelin. I couldn't say no to throwing my first love in an international competition. I had thrown a new personal best in javelin a couple months prior on a whim and with zero practice, and knew I had more possible. I decided not to wear my knee brace that day, as I hadn't had issues with my knee in quite a while. You can probably see where this is going. I hit my block and threw the javelin on my 4th throw on a live stream, and my left knee caved and popped. A full assessment later, and it was determined nothing was torn, but it felt off to me and out of place. The team chiropractor wouldn't touch it, so I had to wait until I flew home from Toronto and went to my chiropractor at home. He popped it back in place, and I went from 10% mobility to 85% instantly. But the flight home had built up a lot of fluid that took months to work out with a lot of therapy. In spite of the injury, I was certain that I would now be funded and be able to have help along my Olympic journey. But funding from Athletics Canada was denied. I didn't protest that first year, figuring I'd improve even more the next year and for sure get funding. There was another blessing in disguise with this injury, and I discovered I was collagen deficient and likely had been since childhood. Finally, getting on a supplement made me feel better than I ever had before. So I'm over here in my 30s feeling better than I had at 17, 18, and able to lift way more than I had then. Though that blessing also had a downside too, because on my journey back from the knee dislocation, I lost feeling in my entire left leg from the hip down. Feeling slowly came back in all but a few toes over the year that followed. I still have numbness in a couple of my toes. I didn't understand the reason for this odd and peculiar problem. It's baffled all of my support team for 6 years. But then I started working with a blind athlete recently who also happens to have numbness on his left side from an injury. And what I've learned in order to work around and recover nerve function from that injury, I'm currently in the process of implementing with him in order to help him be better. The 2019 season ended up being an improvement on my 2018 season with new personal bests and new records broken. I applied for funding again, thinking surely I would be funded now. Instead, Athletics Canada funded number 2, number 3, and number 4 in the country, while I was number 1. I paid to protest as everything in their rules said I should have been funded. I got told I was basically too old and they'd fund who they wanted to fund, regardless of performance. As many of you may know, I was shooting to be at the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. I fundraised locally since I couldn't get funded through my sporting organization. I started that journey in Australia, and I didn't perform as well as I would have liked. I fouled the throw that would have won by over 5 meters. My journey to Australia, everything was looking like there's fires in Australia, so I brought all these masks to protect me from the smoke. And when I get there, there's no smoke, no fires. They'd had their first rain in several months, and it was just beautiful weather. The moment competition started, the sky dumped. And then it stopped as soon as competition was over. So I feel like I was battling something there. We gotta let Megan back in because she got dropped out, I think. So I was going to go back to Australia, but then COVID hit. And then I had to figure out how to get a home gym set up and train at home to continue my Olympic journey. In spite of all the obstacles in the way, I threw another new personal best once we were allowed to compete 7 months later and put myself in a good position to qualify for the Olympics in 2021, where they got moved to. When we started the season in 2021, I climbed to number 34 in the world. I needed to be top 32. And then Alberta shut down our competitions. We were doing competitions with only 5 people out in a big field, everybody masked and 20, 30 meters apart. So this really was depressing. The depression and anger, overcoming so close, and then having my opportunity shut down really messed with me. By the time Alberta opened up again, there were only a couple weeks left in the qualifying period, and my mental state had digressed. I have another but God moment in this, though, and that is I became pregnant with my daughter 3 weeks before the flight to Tokyo would have left. If I had qualified for Tokyo, it would have put my daughter's life in danger, as more than half of the team that I know of came down with COVID, either during or after they went to Tokyo, and many of them are still having physical issues from that bout with COVID. I knew the journey to the next Olympics would be difficult once I found out I was pregnant with my second child. I had continued to improve from 2018 through 2021. I was not able to improve in 2022 and 2023 as I was regaining my body and form post having my baby girl. I was having some funding from Athletics Alberta, and they dropped me several tiers after having my baby because they don't have anything called a health or pregnancy card. So they're like, well, your performance is affected. That's too bad. You're just getting dropped down to a lower level. With having kids, I have changed my platform to push more for other women to continue sport and be supported in their sport post having kids and get back into elite form if that's their goal. Without all the things I've had to go through, I don't think I would have quite the passion to change policies for the women coming after me. The changes that need made have pushed me not to just become an elite athlete and continue going post kids, but I'm also a professional Olympic level coach and currently a national level official. So you can't push for changes unless you have these professional coaching certifications and work up your officiating levels. 2024 was another Olympic run for me, and it started with the best throw of my entire career. I'd never opened with a personal best, and the typical trend is to grow on the beginning of the season. But the season that followed was cold, wet. I was sick at almost every single major competition. I got food poisoning. I got a stomach bug, motion sickness. Like, it's really hard to throw when you're so dizzy you can hardly stand up, and then you're supposed to spin. It was disheartening for me to be so ready and then be foiled by weather in my own body. The Olympic trials, which was our final meet, I was like, I'm ready. I can throw the auto standard here. And then like all the rest of this hardship is moot. It doesn't matter. And then it started pouring as soon as our competition started. There's a lot more that added to the mess that we don't have time for. I'm not sure yet what my but God is in the mess from this last year, though I take some encouragement from something my Canadian coach told me this year. I started jointly working with her in 2018 when I got my citizenship alongside my US coach. She told me that I'm the most stubborn person she's ever known. I took that as a compliment, which I'm assuming she meant it as one. And then she's like, yes, I did mean that as a compliment. I took that stubbornness and turned it into a good finish to this season with a new world record in the throws pentathlon. So all 5 of those events that I did in college are all combined together and done one right after the other on the same morning. And then you get a big score from that. And then my second best discus competition of the year was what I finished the year with. So normally at the end of the year, you're tailing off quite a bit and you're tired. So it's a big deal to finish with the second best competition of the year. It was far better than calling it quits after the Olympic trials and ending on that bad note. I've been told I'm too old as of 10 years ago to continue in my sport. I've been told I'm too young to be a top level official and that I can't coach at the Olympic level because I have young kids. But God turns all of these can'ts into cans. So I'm just waiting for him to work. 2 Chronicles 15:7 is the last verse I'll leave you with today. And that is, but as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. I believe God can bring beauty to our disasters. So keep pushing forward and don't give up. And that's all I've got for today. I do have some discussion questions to go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here though.